Madam President.
Majority Leader.
It's now been more than 6 weeks since Special Counsel Bob Mueller, the former FBI director, concluded his investigation into Russia's interference in our 2016 election and delivered his findings to the Justice Department. It's been 2 weeks since Attorney General William Barr made the 450-page report public. This investigation went on for 2 years. It's finally over. Many Americans were waiting to see how their elected officials would respond. With an exhaustive investigation complete, would the country finally unify to confront the real challenges before us? Would we finally be able to move on from partisan paralysis and breathless conspiracy theorizing? Or would we remain consumed by unhinged partisanship and keep dividing ourselves to the point that Putin and his agents need only stand on the sidelines and watch us as their job is actually done for them? Regrettably, the answer is pretty obvious. So that's what I want to discuss this morning: Russia's interference in American elections, the work of the Special Counsel and the Attorney General, and how we can finally end this Groundhog Day spectacle, stop endlessly relitigating a 2.5-year-old election result, and move forward for the American people. Now, Madam President, it bears remembering what this investigation was actually supposed to be about: Russian interference in 2016. For many of the president's opponents, it quickly morphed into something else, a last hope that maybe they'd never have to come to terms with the American people's choice of a president. In some corners, Special Counsel Mueller came to be regarded as a kind of secular saint, destined to rescue the country from the inconvenient truth that the American people actually elected Donald Trump. For 2 years, many of the president's opponents seemed to be hoping the worst conspiracy theories were actually true. They seemed to be hoping for a national crisis for the sake of their own politics. Now, look, I will say it was at least heartening to see many of my Democratic colleagues and the media abruptly awaken to the dangers of Russian aggression, an awakening to the dangers of Russian aggression. Remember, not long ago, Democrats mocked Republicans like John McCain and Mitt Romney for warning about the dangers posed by Putin's Russia. Remember President Obama's quip back in 2012 when then Governor Romney emphasized his concerns with Russia. Here's what President Obama said when Mitt Romney emphasized his concerns with Russia back in 2012. Direct quote: "The 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back." That was President Obama in 2012. Well, look, I think many of us now see that President Obama's approach to Russia could have used some more of the 1980s, more Ronald Reagan, and less Jimmy Carter. We'd have been better off if the Obama administration hadn't swept Putin's invasion and occupation of Georgia under the rug, or looked away as Russia forced out Western NGOs and cracked down on civil society. If President Obama hadn't let Assad trample his red line in Syria, or embraced Putin's fake deal on chemical weapons. If the Obama administration had responded firmly to Putin's invasion and occupation of Ukraine in 2014, to the assassination of Boris Nemtsov in 2015, and to Russian intervention in Syria. Maybe stronger leadership would have left the Kremlin less emboldened. Maybe tampering with our democracy wouldn't have seemed so very tempting. Instead, The previous administration sent the Kremlin the signal they could get away with almost anything. Almost anything. So is it surprising that we got the brazen interference detailed in Special Counsel Mueller's report? A concerted effort to divide Americans through social media campaigns, hacking into the email accounts and networks of the Clinton campaign and the Democratic Party. Thanks to the investigation, we know more about these tactics. Thanks to the investigation, 13 Russian nationals, 3 Russian companies, and 12 more Russian intelligence officers have been indicted. These are the people who really did seek to undermine our democracy. Yet, curiously, many of our Democratic colleagues and most of the news media don't seem to really care about that. New insight into defending America, Russian nationals indicted, doesn't seem to interest my colleagues across the aisle. No interest. Just like there's been little interest in the steps this administration has taken to make Russia pay for its interference and strengthen America's hand. Election interference was just one part in Russia's strategy to undercut the United States, and this administration has taken the problem head on. We have a new, coherent national security strategy and national defense strategy that actually take the threat seriously. We have new sanctions. We provided Georgia and Ukraine with weapons to better defend themselves, capabilities the previous administration denied our partners, now listen to this, out of fear of provoking Russia. We've worked against pipeline projects like Nord Stream 2 that would further expand Putin's influence. We've strengthened and reforming NATO so the alliance can present a united front. We've proved Russia's noncompliance with the INF and walked away from a treaty that Moscow had turned into a sham. And the Trump administration has, over Russian objections, twice enforced President Obama's red line in Syria after Assad's use of chemical weapons. Now, with respect to election security, Congress appropriated hundreds of millions of dollars to state governments to shore up their systems. The administration increased information sharing from the Department of Homeland Security in cooperation with the states. And according to press reports, the Department of Defense has expanded its capabilities and authorities to thwart cyber threats to our democracy. No longer will we just hope Moscow respects our sovereignty. We will now defend it. These are just a few examples, Madam President, and there's already evidence they're having an effect. We just had the 2018 midterm elections. We just had the 2018 midterm elections. Thanks to this administration's leadership, all 50 states and more than 1,400 local election jurisdictions focused on election security like never before. DHS provided resources to localities for better cybersecurity, and private social media companies monitored their own platforms for foreign intelligence interference. Thanks to efforts across the federal government in 2018, we were ready. That clearly is progress. The Mueller report will help us. So will the upcoming report from the Select Committee on Intelligence. These threats and challenges are real. Our responsibility to strengthen America is serious, and it requires serious work. But speaking of seriousness is not what we've seen from the Democratic Party in recent days. not serious. What we've seen is a meltdown, an absolute meltdown, an inability to accept the bottom line conclusion on Russian interference from the special counsel's report, which said the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. That's the conclusion. 2 years of exhaustive investigation and nothing to establish the fanciful conspiracy theory that Democratic politicians and TV talking heads had treated like a foregone conclusion. They told everyone there had been a conspiracy between Russia and the Trump campaign. Yet on this central question, the special counsel's finding is clear. Case closed. Case closed. This ought to be good news for everyone. But my Democratic colleagues seem to be publicly working through the 5 stages of grief. First stage is denial. Remember what happened when the Attorney General released his preliminary letter describing the special counsel's bottom line legal conclusion? Denial. Immediately, totally baseless speculation that perhaps Attorney General Barr hadn't quoted the report properly. But then, Madam President, comes stage 2, anger. Anger. Welcome to Washington in recent days. The Democrats are angry. Angry that the facts disappointed them. Angry that our legal system will not magically undo the 2016 election for them. And they've opted to channel all their partisan anger onto the Attorney General. Onto the Attorney General. They seem to be angrier at Bill Barr for doing his job than they are at Vladimir Putin. This is a distinguished public servant whose career stretches back almost 50 years. He's widely respected. Nobody claims he has any prior personal allegiance to this particular president. And why are they angry? Why are they angry? Did the Attorney General fire the special counsel or force him to wind down prematurely? No. Did he sit on the Mueller report and keep it secret? No. He quickly reported out its bottom line legal conclusions and then released as much as possible for the world to see. Did he use redactions? Did he use redactions to mislead the public? No. Working with the special counsel's team, he released as much as possible within standard safeguards. So it's hard to see, Madam President, the source of the anger. Maybe our Democrat colleagues are thinking of some strange new kind of cover-up, where you take the entire thing you're supposedly covering up and post it on the internet. The claims get more and more utterly absurd. Baseless accusations of perjury, laughable threats of impeachment. Look, we all know what's going on here. This whole angry barrage that Democrats had prepared to unleash on President Trump, except the facts let them down. The facts let them down. And so the left has swung all of these cannons around and fired them at the Attorney General. Not for any legitimate reason, just because he's a convenient target. So look, Madam President, there's this outrage industrial complex. Outrage industrial complex that spans from Capitol press conferences to cable news. they're grieving. They're grieving that the national crisis they spent 2 years wishing for did not materialize. But for the rest of the country, this is good news. Bad news for the outraged industrial complex, but good news for the country. So now they're slandering a distinguished public servant because the real world has disappointed them. Instead of taking a deep breath and coming back to reality, our colleagues across the aisle want to shoot the messenger and keep the perpetual outrage machine right on going, even undermining the institution of the Attorney General itself in the process. So remember, Russia set out to sow discord, to create chaos in American politics, and undermine confidence in our democracy. But on that front, given the left's total fixation on delegitimizing the president Americans chose and shooting any messenger who tells them inconvenient truths, I'm afraid the Russians hardly need to lift a finger. Hardly need to lift a finger. Well, Madam President, the last stage of grief is acceptance. For the country's sake, I hope my Democratic friends can get there sometime soon. There are serious issues the American people need us to tackle. There's more progress for middle-class families we need to deliver. For 2 years, the Democratic Party held out hope that the legal system would undo their loss in 2016. They refused to make peace with the American people's choice. But the American people elected this president. They did. The American people voted for change. The American people sent us here to deliver results for their families. That's what Republicans have been doing for the past 2 years and counting. That's what Republicans will continue to do. And whenever our Democratic friends can regain their composure, and come back to reality, we look forward to their help. And there are 2 bills at the desk due to second reading and block.
The leader is correct. The clerk will read the titles of the bills for the second time en bloc.
S. 1332, a bill to set forth the congressional budget for the United States government and so forth. H.R. 9, an act to direct the President to develop a plan for the United States and so forth.
In order to place the bills on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14, I would object to further proceeding en bloc.
Objection having been heard, the bills will be placed on the calendar.
I suggest the opposite.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.